Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, the French President Emmanuel Macron holds talks with allies and senior politicians as he seeks to appoint a replacement prime minister. This the day after Michel Barnier was toppled. Following heavy clashes, opposition forces captured the central Syrian city of Hama. This comes just days after they seized the city of Aleppo. Hundreds of protesters marched through central Seoul, calling for the resignation of the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, following on from an outcry over his declaration of martial law. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin with the news that the French Prime Minister Michel Barnier officially handed in his resignation during a meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron earlier on today at the Élysée Palace. Well, Barnier's minority government collapsed on Wednesday due to a no-confidence vote over a controversial budget proposal, making him the first Prime Minister in 60 years to be removed by such a vote just 3 months into his term. Well, France's parliament is deeply divided and no fresh elections are permitted until July of next year. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to the French Senator Nathalie Goulet. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It looks like France is in a state of political and financial chaos. How has it come to this point?
Well, you know that last June, the president decided to recall parliamentary election. And as a result of those parliamentary election, we didn't have any clear majority. So the situation now is that the extreme left came together with the extreme right and just make the government fall. As simple as that.
So what happens now? Who's going to succeed Michel Barnier as Prime Minister?
Well, my deep wish would be that Michel Barnier succeed at himself. But I don't know. The president now is going to have a lot of consultation. I would like to remind you that last time it took almost for more than 3 weeks to have a prime minister. So I hope that he will appoint a new prime minister very, very soon so we can continue to vote the budget, because right now we don't have any parliamentary work because we don't have a government anymore.
But will Barnier stay on as caretaker prime minister until a new prime minister is found? And can he stay on as... But can he stay on as caretaker prime minister until, for example, next July, when there are fresh parliamentary elections?
No. That is not possible. That is just for a short period of time, the time that the president will appoint somebody else or himself again. You know, it's very possible. I mean, technically, the president can appoint him again to form a new government. That is very possible. Technically, it's open, but I don't think it will be the case, unfortunately.
Again, in terms of candidates, who's on the short list, do you think?
Well, we have a lot. You know, you always have candidates for the job, and then when they are appointed, they don't make it anymore. You know, it's very common everywhere on earth. So we have Mr. Le Cornu, who was Minister of Defense. We have François Bayrou, who is an old friend of the president and old character of the French political landscape. We have Bruno Retailleau, who was previously Minister of Interior. He's he's an excellent minister with a lot of will to do the best for the country. So we have a lot of candidates. We always have a lot of candidates, you know, that happens, as I told you, everywhere.
I mean, isn't the next Prime Minister just going to face exactly the same problems that Barnier faced, in particular this issue of the budget?
Well, the issue of the budget is not really the issue. The issue is that you have a technician of the chaos in this Assemblée nationale. You have people who just want to create a chaos. So whatever will be the subject, you know, when you want to kill your dog, you just say that he's enraged. So I think that whatever will be the subject, they will always find an alibi to create this kind of chaos. The budget is not an alibi. And then they blackmail the prime minister, and the prime minister cannot be blackmailed in a democracy.
But this budget is extremely unpopular with the French public. Why is that? Don't they realise that it's not for fun that President Macron would put a budget like that on his radar? He sees it as a necessity for France in the longer term. Don't the people understand that?
No, I'm in a finance committee, and the budget is not so bad. The problem is that we have a huge deficit, and we have to reduce it. So we have to cut measure. But this budget was not so bad. It's just that the communication around it and what the extreme left or extreme right did about this budget gave this bad impression. But the budget is not so bad regarding the huge debt that France have. So, I mean, when you own money, when the budget of the interest of the debt is almost equivalent to the budget of the defense, it's more than 50 billion euro a year. So maybe you have to pay attention. And then we have European Union who ask her precisely to pay attention to this huge deficit. So the budget is not so bad. As I told you, for me, it's just an alibi.
Yeah, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far-right National Rally, said that the budget was toxic for the French people.
She also is toxic for the French people. She is more toxic than any budget.
She also said that all of this was a problem of Emmanuel Macron's making. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the president didn't use the right proceedings, that he did very bad to recall a parliamentary election last year. Last summer, it was a big, huge mistake. But then Mrs. Le Pen is not saying anything about the effort that all of French taxpayers did during COVID to support the company, to support the people, to solve this pandemic, and the effort that they did for the people to pay last taxes, and all the effort that has been done last year and the year before. She just sees the dark side of the history.
France hasn't found itself.
But the extreme left is the same.
Okay, and I was just going to say France hasn't found itself in a situation like this where a prime minister has been toppled by a no-confidence vote since 1962, when Pompidou's government lost a confidence vote. There are more than 2 years left of President Macron's term. Do you think he can survive this?
I think that we need a good fortune teller. But I think the situation will be very, very difficult because, the people who are used to blackmail, if they blackmail once, they will blackmail again, whoever will be prime minister. And then, as I told you, you have some extreme left technician of chaos, and whoever will be prime minister, they will jump on it and on him and try to jeopardize the situation. So I don't know what kind of magic rabbit will come out of the presidential hat as a prime minister, but we wish him a very good luck.
But going back to this concept of the president surviving this political storm, according to 2 opinion polls, one I saw said 54% of the French public want Emmanuel Macron to resign right now. Another poll said 64% of the French public want Emmanuel Macron to resign right now. I mean, can we really not rule out early presidential elections?
Polls are not making a politic. But what I think is that the people are scared. They are scared of what they hear. They are scared of strikes. They are scared of the instability. And then they blame the president for it. And so if the president is not able to deal with that, they want the president to change. So the results that you just mentioned are very logical regarding the situation.
And given, as you said, this gamble of the elections in July backfired on President Macron, I mean, it's very difficult for the French public to blame anyone but him, isn't it?
Everybody is blaming him, even his very close team. because the closer people were not aware about this situation that he will recall election after the European election. It's a drastic and dramatic mistake. Nobody can say something else, but now we have to deal with the situation. And France is a big country. We are a permanent member of the Security Council. We have international issue. We have a financial issue. We have social issue, and we need a government to deal with. So we need to be responsible. We need to have a solution which will fit till the next presidential election. That is our task now for member of the parliament.
But this is really worrying for the whole of Europe, isn't it? Because France and Germany are supposed to be the two strong leaders in Europe. We've got a situation where both of them are looking politically extremely fragile, aren't they?
Sure, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because we miss a strong leadership. We don't have a strong leadership in Europe. We don't have this couple France and Germany together as we used to have in the past. Then we had the Brexit, and then we have the rest of the world turning, and they are not waiting for us to move ahead. So it's a very, very, very difficult situation and very fragile. I do agree.
Senator, I know you have to go.
And I'm very sorry for that.
In a couple of words, what do you think this means for France's standing on the international stage?
Well, I hope that we will have a solution very soon, because we have to keep our place in the international community. But I think that that makes us very weak and not trustable at all. So I think that we will have to solve this fact, and the people have to put a general interest on the table instead of their own interest. That is my wish for today.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. French Senator Nathalie Goulet, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to turn our attention now to the situation in Syria, where the city of Hama has fallen to Syria's opposition armed groups. Well, according to Syria's defense ministry, they entered the strategic city earlier on today as they continued their surprise offensive, which has already captured significant territory from government forces, including Syria's second largest city, the city of Aleppo. Well, located in central Syria, Hama is a key military hub with vital sites such as the Hama military airport and the military intelligence directorate. Its capture could pave the way for the opposition's advance towards another strategic city. That's the city of Homs. Well, to tell us more, we're joined now by PJ Crowley, who is a former US Assistant Secretary of State and author of Red Line, American Foreign Policy in the Time of Fractured Politics and Failing States. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington. The Syrian army says it's withdrawn now from Hama. That is, of course, Syria's fourth largest city. How serious a setback is this, in your opinion, for President Bashar al-Assad?
Well, that remains to be seen, Tom. I do think it's a reminder of how fragile Syrian government institutions are. And we should remind ourselves, Syria is a failed state. It has been one for several years. We've now seen the Syrian civil war extend for more than a decade. Whether this changes the overall contours of the longstanding conflict remains to be seen. But to survive, Bashar al-Assad is going to need considerable help from Russia and Iran, his primary protectors. But their ability to help him is also in question, given what's happening elsewhere in the region and also in Ukraine.
So just give us a sense of who is now in control of Hama. Who are the opposition forces there?
Well, HTS was formerly known as Jabhat al-Nusra. They were affiliated with Al-Qaeda previously. Now they appear to have rebranded themselves as an independent group. But they are a long-standing presence in Syria. Obviously, they have used this, intervening period to regain considerable, military strength. And as they have advanced, the Syrian armed forces have retreated. How far they can go, the degree to which they can, control territory or expanded territory, remains to be seen. They're clearly not the only opposition element operating in the 30 or 35% of the country that the government does not control, but they're showing surprising strength so far.
Indeed, they've taken everyone by surprise during these last 8 days or so in particular. And I'm just wondering what you think the presence of opposition factions like the one you've just described would mean for ordinary Syrian civilians going about their lives in cities like Aleppo and Hama.
Well, you have to call into question what is the loyalty of people in these areas to the government. Are they willing to change sides? And if they are, there's the potential for a cascading effect. But we have to remind ourselves, going back to 2011, you have seen these surprising demonstrations of alternative power sources in the region. But for the most part, governments have regrouped and been able to to push them back or overcome them. So whether Assad does Assad have the ability to do this by himself? The answer is no. But can Assad survive with the help of others? Iran, for example, is moving some of its proxy forces into Syria to be helpful. Hezbollah has been an anchor of that effort over the years. They are considerably weakened. So I think the next thing to look for is to what extent outside forces are able to help stabilize the situation and give Assad some breathing space.
Yeah, I mean, just looking back in time, I mean, since about 2016, it doesn't seem like there have been any major shifts in terms of who controls which territory in Syria. And I'm just wondering what your reading is into the timing of this very rapid evolution of events that we've seen during the last 8 or 10 days.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence. Clearly they have been watching what's happened elsewhere. They see a Hezbollah that's severely weakened. They see an Iran that is at least distracted, if not also, weakens. They saw an opportunity, and have seized it. And they're not the only one. The so-called, Syrian defense forces, the Kurdish group that also operates in this section of Syria, they too have expanded their presence in parts of the country that the government does not control. So far, this is, opposition forces advancing, government forces retreating. Where and how this ends, I think it's unclear.
Indeed, and I just want to get your sense of why you think it is that these opposition forces are experiencing what seems like so little resistance from Syrian government forces. Is it due to the fact that they're ill-equipped, or is this an issue of loyalties?
It could be both. Certainly, to the extent that Assad has survived only because of Russian assistance and Iranian resistance, the fact that their ability to help has been weakened has certainly helped the opposition forces. That said, on the other side of the coin, Russia and Iran are going to go to considerable lengths to make sure that Assad is still able to survive. So I think we could be in store for some fiercer fighting, as this proceeds.
Let's bring up a map just to explain to our viewers the significance of the cities that we're talking about and where they fit into the picture. There we can see them, Hama right in the middle, halfway between Aleppo and the capital, Damascus. I mean, we saw Aleppo fall first, then Hama. I mean, would you say it's a matter of time before we see Homs, which is somewhere further down below Hama, being perhaps the next city to come under opposition control?
I think that certainly would be logical, but again, we don't know really, to what degree these opposition forces have the ability to expand their control of the country and hold on to that territory. From Assad's standpoint, obviously, the crucial element is Damascus, and Damascus is not under threat. And I don't think that you have, you're facing an opposition that has the ability, to challenge, the hold on that portion of Syria that the Assad government still maintains. That is their stronghold. What's unclear here is what happens after this advance. Is there going to be a negotiation? Is there, there's no logical next step, in terms of what happens here. So I would expect that at some point, the situation will restabilize, and then the next thought is, to what extent the government, helped by Russia and Iran, would begin some sort of counteroffensive. That would be something that I would expect to happen down the road.
Turkey, of course, is a country that's been a key backer of some of the opposition forces. But Ankara says it's had no hand in these recent developments. What do you think of the fact that they've come out with that statement?
Well, I do think that the role that Turkey is playing is important. Erdogan has long seen himself, as looking for an opportunity, to expand Turkey's influence in the region, perhaps at the expense of Iran. So I do think that that's a under the radar, that is a crucial role. And I'm sure here in Washington, the United States is talking to everyone in the region, Turkey most notably, to kind of get a sense of, okay, where do you see this going? What happens next? And those conversations are ongoing.
We received word in the last couple of hours that the central prison in Hama is now under opposition control. And I'm just wondering, what sorts of people do you think are now, who are likely to be in there, who are now going to be perhaps freed? What sort of profile of person do you think would be in such a prison?
Well, I think it's highly symbolic and very important that as HTS has said, Assad was the one, both Assad and his father, were the ones who were throwing people in prison in Hama, and HTS is the one that has come in and is freeing these people. That's a wild card, and whether they will, join up with HTS to some extent, whether they will create mayhem in the area, we'll have to wait and see. But clearly, that is of great symbolic importance, and it is a counter narrative to whatever Assad is trying to say.
The leader of HTS is calling on the Iraqi Prime Minister not to get involved in what's happening there in Syria. Why do you think he's making such a direct appeal to Baghdad? In all likelihood, some of the elements, Iranian-backed militias that might be moving into Syria are coming from Iraq. And so whether the Iraqi government is in a position to control that in any way, to influence that in any way, I think would be an important sub-element of this. So, to the extent that HTS sees Iran starting to react, if Iraq is a counterweight in that effort, that obviously would be helpful to them. Syria borders a number of other countries, one of them being Iraq, that we've just been talking about, the others being Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, and to a certain extent Israel with the Golan Heights. I'm just wondering if you think we're likely to see a massive exodus from Syria, and whether those neighboring countries, some of them, might be ready to take large numbers of refugees, bearing in mind that it is now winter and very cold in parts of Syria.
Sure. Actually, that's a double-edged question. Over the long term, we've been talking about Turkey, for example. One question is whether Erdogan is supporting this effort with the idea that at some point in time, if you're able to capture these major cities, Syrian refugees who are currently in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon, might have the ability to return home at some point. I think that's a major sub-element of this, to the extent that you're capturing major cities, major population centers, that would suggest that, people from there, evacuated Syria years ago. And I mean, everybody at some point in time would love to go home. And I wonder if, to the extent that this restabilizes in a way that Hama, Homs, others, place Aleppo, would enable, not now, but sometime down the road, these countries might be looking to actually, rather than gain additional refugees, actually lose refugees over the long term. That's a major kind of subplot in this.
Indeed, I mean, it is extremely complex to understand what's happening in Syria, because as you've been alluding to, there are lots of different parties involved. I mean, this is my last question to you, and we're sort of going back to where we started here. Hama has managed to stay under government control ever since the unrest in Syria began in 2011, so that's 13 years. Today, Hama, we understand, is under the control of opposition forces. It's 200 kilometers away from the capital, Damascus. How vulnerable would you say the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, is looking at this stage?
If you go back to 2011, Barack Obama, then president of the United States, said that Assad had lost his legitimacy to lead and should step down. We should be reminded that 13 years later, he's still there. I think he has staying power, for that section of the country that he controls. He clearly has the backing not only of Russia, and Iran, but over a number of years, we've seen emissaries from Gulf countries and other countries that have been working quietly towards the presumed rehabilitation of Assad, reintegration of Syria back into regional institutions. So a lot will depend on how Assad reacts, how the Syrian people reacts. I don't think he's in danger right now, but clearly, he's likely to lose control of some percentage of the country. And it's unclear to me where this goes in the long run. But Assad has shown us that, above everything else, his interest is survival. He has survived for 13 years. I expect him to survive this, even if he relinquishes control of key cities in the process.
Okay, PJ Crowley, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
A pleasure, Tom.
Well, for more, we can speak now to Tanya Evans, International Rescue Committee Country Director in Syria. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Al Arabiya News. The war in Syria is now in its 12th year. We've got escalating hostilities there. What's the latest you're hearing with regards to the situation on the ground?
Thank you very much. The situation is rapidly unfolding at a pace that I think no one really expected. Hostilities continue and escalations continue across the board. And what we're hearing now is of significant displacement happening. We're also aware that airstrikes continue and that we continue, unfortunately, to see large numbers of injuries. Upwards of 200 individuals are known to be injured so far, and around 69 casualties and fatalities have been reported, including children and women. The situation in Syria was already dire, and the current rapidly unfolding situation is just adding an added layer of complexity onto a very, very complex response.
Yeah, you've raised lots of important points. Let's pick up on just one of them before we attend to the others. A lot of people displaced, you say, and I'm just wondering where people are going. Where is it safe for people to go to?
We are aware that there is a lot of movement happening at the moment from Aleppo into northeast Syria. Current estimates suggest that around 60,000 individuals have moved, with an anticipated 60,000 more expected in the coming days. The journey is not easy. It is also, winter is fast approaching. It is getting rapidly cold. And we do know, sadly, that there have been fatalities, including young children on this journey. We have team members on the ground at border movement points and at reception centres across Raqqa Governorate. And what we're hearing is that the situation is incredibly desperate for the people who are crossing. They are in urgent need of health services. They are in urgent need of water. They're in urgent need of food, and and many are also in urgent need of somewhere safe and warm to stay.
Yeah, and with regards to health facilities that you mentioned, I mean, there are reports that some hospitals have, in fact, been struck in the course of the last couple of days. And I'm just wondering whether that means people have much access. What options are there for medical treatment for people that need it?
Some hospitals have sadly been struck, and so where hospitals were running, they are running at partial capacity, being able to respond to urgent needs. We're also looking at mobile medical unit deployment. We are deploying medical units in locations across northeast Syria, as are other partners. And so we're really doing the best that we can to be able to keep services running in a very unpredictable situation right now, while also trying to keep staff safe, medical staff safe. So it really is quite desperate.
Yeah, and as you said, the situation is evolving extremely fast. And I think a lot of people we've spoken to on this channel have expressed their surprise at just how quickly things develop there. And I'm presuming that also means that people in Syria, the people themselves that you're talking about, didn't have time to prepare, and therefore people's supplies are going to run out entirely very quickly, aren't they?
Absolutely. Really such surprise as this unfolded so rapidly. In those first few days, the lines were changing on an hourly basis. The needle was shifting constantly. While we are seeing a somewhat slowdown, by no means does this mean that it is over, and we expect to see continued escalations, continued hostilities, continued safety and security concerns for civilians on the ground. And so, yes, it does mean that supplies are going to increasingly become a very huge problem. We also know in Aleppo that with critical infrastructure being targeted, that we're going to be looking at a fuel problem. And so really, if we do not see an immediate de-escalation, we're going to very quickly struggle to be able to meet needs on the ground.
Okay, and I gather the International Rescue Committee was forced to halt some of its operations as long ago as late November, so before we started reporting on this. I'm just wondering why that was.
We have seen escalations taking place for the last few months. There has been a steady kind of increase of escalations taking place. We have repeatedly had to suspend operations temporarily. Humanitarian actors have had to do this in order to keep our beneficiaries safe, to keep our clients safe. And so, yes, we were temporarily having to suspend operations. As recently as last week, we did have to temporarily suspend, but we are constantly looking at watching the environment, monitoring and seeing when we can resume services, because we provide critical services and people are in need of these services, particularly health services right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm assuming that for your staff, for your associates, it's extremely dangerous working on the ground. Just paint a picture for us of what it's like working on the ground in Syria under these sorts of conditions.
Absolutely. I mean, if I speak to what our team members in Idlib are going through right now, as we have been looking at gradually being able to resume critical services, meaning we've got team members going back into health centers and other facilities, we're doing so cautiously, and we're doing so knowing that at any time they could witness airstrikes. And this happened just a couple of days ago while we had team members in facilities, that there were alerts and airstrikes were taking place. And when it was safe to do so, we were hearing back from our team members that they could hear, see, and feel these airstrikes that were taking place in such close vicinity to these critical services that we're running for people on the ground.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, you paint a picture there of an extremely desperate situation in which civilians are paying a very high price for what's going on around them. You've issued, in the name of the International Rescue Committee, an appeal to the warring parties. Just tell us what that appeal is.
We need to see an immediate de-escalation of the situation right now, and we need to see all parties of the conflict to ensure the protection of civilians, civilian infrastructure, and humanitarian operations in line with international humanitarian law. This is absolutely fundamental. The crisis in Syria was desperate already. It is only getting worse, and to enable humanitarian actors to be able to meet community needs on the ground, growing needs on the ground, it is absolutely crucial that we see the commitment to international humanitarian law.
Okay, if someone watching wants to help, what can they do?
Funding is critical for Syria right now. Funding has continued to be on a downward trend. And so we need to ensure that we can get as much financial resources as possible to be able to continue scaling up needs.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Tanya Evans, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now to the situation in South Korea, where hundreds of protesters have today been marching through the heart of the capital, Seoul. Well, they're calling for the resignation of the president, Yoon Suk Yeol, following on from an outcry over the declaration of martial law. Well, the police say he is being investigated for insurrection, and Parliament is moving closer to a vote on his impeachment. Meanwhile, the situation in Seoul remains tense. The opposition needs at least 8 members of Yoon's own party to vote for his impeachment for the motion to pass with a 2/3 majority in the 300-seat parliament. For more, we can speak now to career expert Dr. Jim Hoare. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You were the first British representative to Pyongyang. You were also stationed in Seoul as a diplomat during the 1980s. And I want to start by asking you, we've had about 24 hours to take stock of these unexpected developments in South Korea. I mean, what's your take on what on earth is going on there?
I think Mr. Yoon rather lost the plot. He was always a rather marginal president in a sense that he only won by the slimmest of all majorities. I mean, less than 1%. The lowest of any South Korean president. And until recently, his party was in command of the National Assembly, but they lost that at the last National Assembly election. And instead, the opposition came in with a huge majority and have been both very critical of the president's wife for accepting expensive gifts and not declaring them, and also more recently for they overturned the budget proposals and proposed a much reduced budget. This seems to have fazed Mr. Yoon, who took the action he did on the 3rd to declare martial law without, it would seem to me, much preparation. I mean, I would have thought that if you were going to do that, you would have had all your troops in position, ready to take over the Parliament building and strategic things like the media and so on. None of that seems to have been arranged. Some troops were sent to the National Assembly, but they quickly retreated when they met the opposition of the lawmakers and some of the crowd outside. So it seems to have been an ill-thought-out panic decision, which was rescinded as soon as it was opposed.
And of course, the pretext that President Yoon gave for imposing martial law was the necessity to defend South Korea from pro-North Korean so-called anti-state forces. I mean, let's be clear, were there any specific threats, would you say?
No, I think that's dog whistle sort of tactic. That there are certain themes that the South Koreans always use, that there are opposition favors the North, and therefore it must be communist inspired, which I don't think there was any evidence for whatsoever, and that has disappeared from the public pronouncements. No, I think that was just a standard smear, if you like.
Okay, so as you say, logistically few preparations were made, no credible or clear threat from the DPRK. So that still begs the question, what was the South Korean president trying to achieve, do you think?
I think he was trying to be able to do things as he wanted to do them, particularly to get his budget through, to stop the criticism of his wife. And if you close down the National Assembly, then you could do both of those things. Although so he thought, but it clearly has completely misfired, and it looks as though there'd be a fair chance he will be out of office before very long, and possibly then facing criminal charges. It's ironic in a sense, because he was the chief prosecutor of Park Geun-hye, who was the president, not one before last, who was ousted by following an impeachment and imprisoned, later pardoned, but imprisoned. To say he was the prosecutor in that case.
Right, so a twist of irony as well. I mean, of course, you know both Koreas well. You've served in both the North and the South, which makes your knowledge particularly rare and valuable. Just how fragile, would you say, is the state of democracy looking to you in South Korea right now?
Well, I think it was a late developing flower. There's no doubt about that. It really only dates from the early 1990s, when there was a peaceable transfer from the last of the military rulers, President Roh Tae-woo, to a long-term civilian politician, Kim Yong-sam. And then it passed from him peacefully to Kim Dae-jung and so on. So I think it has become well established. And as a point I was hearing frequently last night in some commentaries, that those who've actually experienced martial law would now be people in their as adults, probably in their 60s and so on. It stopped in 1980 when Chun Doo-hwan came to power. And once he'd made himself president, then martial law was lifted. So there's been quite a long tradition now when no government has resorted to martial law because it didn't see the necessity of it. And I think, frankly, that's how the population will have reacted. A lot of the population will have reacted to this particular move. There was no need for it. There was no increased threat from the North or any other major problem. This was, I think, President Yoon either panicking or being frustrated at not being able to do what he wanted. And so he chose this blunderbuss approach, if you like.
Okay, so no martial law in South Korea in 44 years, since 1980, as you said. So before the time you were serving there as a diplomat. Notable for us to mention as well that there are some 28,000 US troops based in South Korea. And we're hearing now that from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that Washington wasn't actually informed of this decision to impose martial law. Do you find that rather surprising?
I have, my impression is that Mr. Yoon made this decision on his own rather suddenly, without really informing anybody. It was not very sensible not to inform the United States, but then if he had done, there's a fair chance that somebody would have leaked that news, that he was planning to do this. So I can understand that the American concern that here is a very close ally. As you say, there are American troops on the ground in South Korea. They are an important part of the defense of South Korea, and yet they were blindsided on this occasion.
Just lastly,
Mind you, I don't think in past declarations of martial law, I don't think the Americans were informed either. I think there's probably a track record there.
Okay,
and do these things.
Sure, and I just wanted to ask you lastly, I mean, we've had some pretty dramatic scenes in Parliament during the course of the last 24 hours in Seoul. There have been some large protests, we understand. I just want to ask for your sort of thoughts as to where you see things heading to from here, Dr. Hoare.
Well, I would be very surprised if Parliament doesn't go ahead with an impeachment process. I mean, I think it's not just the opposition party, which has a majority in the House, but also the smaller parties in the House. And some of Yoon's own party have been saying he shouldn't have done this. He should be impeached. So I think that we will see a move in Parliament in the next few days to impeach the president. Now everybody is on alert to make sure that if there is another attempt at anything like a military intervention, that the protests will be very strong and very, very marked. And if the impeachment goes ahead, then it goes to the courts, and I think Yoon might find himself a convicted criminal. But that's speculation on my part. But I think there's going to be a period of uncertainty, but it looks as though the opposition is going to be in control. Yoon's own secretariat, the staff of the Blue House, have all offered their resignation, and his government doesn't seem to be his government doesn't seem to want to support him either. So I think his days are numbered.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, career expert Dr. Jim Hoare. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, for more analysis on the situation, we can speak now to Yo Han-koo, a former trade minister for South Korea under President Moon Jae-in. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. You've been quoted in the media as saying that President Yoon has made a grave mistake. Why do you say that?
This is 21st century Korea, and it was about 40 years ago that the previous, the Korean president used this martial law. But now, Korea is fully democratized, and, it was really kind of stunned many Korean people last night. So I think it could really weaken his political base because of this martial kind of law, the action last night.
Okay, and we understand there were no specific threats with regards to North Korea, which President Yoon actually had cited. So what do you think he was trying to achieve?
His approval rating has been hovering around, 17, 18, 19% for the last, the last few weeks. And then, he has been sort of kind of going through a tough time because of some of the kind of scandal related to the First Lady. And also, right now, the Korean National Assembly is really dominated by the opposition party. So many of these key policy initiatives were really blocked by this opposition party. And I guess that might have really frustrated him as well. So I don't know. I mean, nobody really know, what the President Yoon was trying to achieve with this very radical and surprise martial law action. But obviously, that really, was a kind of grave misjudgment or kind of a mistake he made.
Do you think he's likely to survive, or would you say that impeachment was the likely next step forward for President Yoon Suk Yeol?
I think it remains to be seen. Unfortunately, Korea had the similar experience about 7-8 years ago when the former President Park was impeached. Right now, we feel like this unfortunate deja vu is coming back. And right now, in order to impeach the president, we have to go through a few steps. First, this the vote by National Assembly has to be passed. Right now, this in order to impeach, it needs two-third majority, and right now this opposition party is only 8 seats short of this two-third majority. So it depends on this aid, kind of vote from the ruling party, whether some of these ruling party lawmakers could defect to this, kind of the impeachment camp. So, but now, I mean, the last night, it was really surreal and stunning movement, and many Korean people were really, how can I say, outraged and frustrated by this sudden move by President Yoon. So obviously, right now, for the next few weeks, this impeachment will be really at the front and center of the Korean politics, and we have to, see how this turned out to be.
When you got the news, I'm just wondering what went through your mind?
I just thought it was fake news. I mean, last night when I got this text from my friend, my first reaction was that it shouldn't be real. I mean, it must be fake news or some joke or something. So that really shows that, I mean, it's a 21st century, and Korea is one of the most, highly advanced and also most democratized, countries in the world. And I mean, nobody might have expected that we could see such a scene that we saw, like, movies from this 40 years ago could replay again in reality.
Now, I've heard you in other interviews linking the situation in South Korea and the sense of frustration that you just described there to the advent or the return of Donald Trump to the White House in Washington. What's the connection?
I think it's a, weird coincidence, but actually in 2017, when Donald Trump was inaugurated, just only a few months later, the Korean president at that time, Park, was impeached. Right now, this Donald Trump 2.0 will be inaugurated in January 20th. And then now Korea is entering into a new, this impeachment kind of, debate and this political turmoil. So unfortunately, it's a kind of weird coincidence or, deja vu, coming back.
Yeah, and people in Washington must be pretty worried looking at South Korea these last 24 hours, a key ally. 28,500 US troops are stationed in your country. We understand that Washington wasn't even informed that martial law was about to be declared. Do you think that there is any sort of lasting diplomatic fallout from all of this?
I wouldn't, amplify the fallout from this last night's saga. I think, the good news is that this, martial law was kind of lifted only after about 6 hours later. And it shows that the Korean, the democracies is alive and resilient. And right now, the Korean politics is kind of shifting towards this impeachment, debate. So again, this is also, based on this, National Assembly and this democratic process. So yes, obviously, Washington might have been surprised, and also more kind of information sharing and more discussion need to be carried out on both sides. But I think, we have to be a bit more patient.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to the pretext for the martial law being imposed, which was this threat cited by President Yoon from North Korea. Turns out there was no specific threat, or not that we know of. But I'm just wondering what this says about relations between the two countries and the fact that some fears over North Korea can cause political paralysis across the border in your country. Do you think North Korea might try to exploit this?
I mean, considering this security, environment that South Korea face in regard to North Korea, I mean, we always have to be vigilant about the possibility of North Korean provocation or manipulation in this kind of vulnerable, situation. During this administration, this Korean government has been really kind of hawkish, maintaining hawkish stance when it comes to North Korea. And also North Korea also kind of shifted their policy, stance towards South Korea as they are sort of giving up on reunification and seeing South Korea as a main kind of enemy and, so on and so forth. So this tension has been quite escalating. And as we know, recently North Korea sent their, troops to Ukraine. And probably, there might have been very dangerous kind of a transaction in terms of sensitive technology transfer from Russia to North Korea. So when we look at all these security circumstances, we cannot underestimate the possible provocation by North Korea in this kind of situation.
One of your colleagues in South Korea, Kim Min-seok, who is a senior Democratic Party official, described what's happened in the last 24 hours as follows. He said, "We have an abnormal president with an abnormal presidential wife who tried to protect abnormal power." What do you have to say to that?
I think really it's unfortunate that, that we find ourselves in this kind of, situation. And, there is obviously, political differences between different parties, and there might be some, confrontation, etc. But I think it's always important to bring together these different parties and kind of embrace different opinions and kind of, find solution through compromise and, discussion. But looks like this kind of process was kind of a missing, for the last, few months or, years in this administration. So I think we need to, bring back this, normality into this political environment again.
Yeah, okay, so 6 hours of martial law have now come to an end. We've had some dramatic scenes in Parliament. There's been some major protests, some unions calling for a general strike. I mean, how do you see the next few days unfolding for South Korea?
Right now, this opposition party is really, kind of moving into this the impeachment mode. In the National Assembly. And then, as I said, whether, this National Assembly could achieve this 2/3 majority to get it approved in the National Assembly, that would be really critical scene, which will determine the fate of this president and also the fate of this Korean politics for coming month. So, but I would say that because of the, the last night surprise, this saga related to this martial, the martial law, the invocation, I think this, this Korean public were very, how can I say, disappointed, and then sort of lost confidence in the current government. So we have to see how this Korean public and the National Assembly kind of find a solution and try to normalize the situation in coming weeks and months.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We really appreciate it. Yohan Koo, former Trade Minister for South Korea. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's find out more now about the significance of these developments in South Korea, the reality behind the perceived threat level from Pyongyang, and find out more about the reality of life in North Korea, where we can speak to Timothy Cho, a North Korean human rights activist and two-time defector who joins us from London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. South Korea's President Yoon imposed this martial law last night, saying he's defending the country from North Korean anti-state forces. I'm just wondering, what did you think when you heard that news?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. Well, I was quite shocked as my role, particularly human rights activist, and I'm also secretariat for the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group of North Korea, and continue monitor on this situation and both inside and outside of North Korea. But something was happening in South Korea yesterday, and I first thought it was a fake news, but which I confirmed with the government of Republic of Korea. It was happening, and but following the President Yoon's statement, and this was not what he actually said. I'm citing that direct threat from North Korea and the nuclear threat from North Korea, but it was more likely he was referring the within internal political opposition. But he also then adding that part of anti-North Korean forces. So it's quite been, of course, the political situation in South Korea is very divided at the moment, and extremely divided between pro-North Korean side, or we may also mentioning a far left group in South Korea, and in terms of the political situation in the country. And he probably felt there was quite extreme movement of it, and especially within the parliament. And even though he's the president, I think his role might be quite limited to do so in many ways, including the budget plan for next year. I'm not exactly sure, however, was it really necessary that he had to declare martial law, which is very unprecedented, and even call the special force entering the parliament and blocking with order to arrest or even could kill someone under that constitution. So, and I have to say, frankly, it was quite shocking to see, particularly South Korea today, we regard such a democracy, and I was very alarming and carefully following the development and the situation in South Korea. Of course, it was after 6 hours, and the martial law lifted, which relieved me. However, the political situation remained quite uncertain in this country, and I continue watch the situation and which way it may develop in the coming weeks, especially opposition parties and the groups and all across the country, as well as you follow the news right now. Okay. And they call impeachment or ask the president to step down from what it's been happening over the past few hours.
Yeah, and of course, Timothy, you grew up in North Korea, and I'm just wondering how you think all of these developments in South Korea are viewed by the North.
Well, if you ask me as a North Korean escapee, an activist, and grew up my life within the totalitarian system, it's something not possible in North Korea, this kind of martial law or movement or even the president's use of the force and try to calm the political situation. By all means, nothing is possible in North Korea. Even any protest or military coup happens in North Korea, the government come out with the all available weaponry, including tanks or even air flight, and they could just wipe away all these protesters involved. And of course, there is no media search follows, and the international attention come to scrutinize, and media are going to ask experts and politicians around the world about the situation on such country, like what happens last night in South Korea. I think it is happening because South Korea is a democratic country, and it is quite sad. The result was the president had to use the last resort of military and martial law, and if he was no alternative choice for him to make such decision, and I would personally, of course, have a number of questions for him. Would he really have had to use this kind of the final options? However, still comparing, as I was even talking or following the conversation with my North Korean colleagues and activist colleagues, and we still talked about this, where this such development or movement or what happened, or even people gathered at the parliament, over 4,000 people within a couple of hours gathered in South Korea. That is such not happens in North Korea. I wonder, however, what was North Korean regime's viewpoint? Particularly, they were watching on this, what was happening in South Korea. And certainly, if there were any kind of movement was motivated, encouraged from North Korea's related groups in South Korea, what we call far left, maybe quite far left group, or North Korean supportive groups. And I think that's such amusing for North Korea, particularly with current situation where North Korea has been stepping into even international the security threat and joining Putin's illegal war, the reputation and has been gaining by themselves. And also they even declared the first time and admitted at the United Nations that they have prison camps and even executing political prisoners by all means, and people who have been expressing against the regime, or those repatriated North Korean refugees during their escape, and who also had contact with missionaries or attended churches, and such as all these, North Korea regard them as spy, and that spy, the punishment comes what they so-called political prisoners. So I felt it was quite a dangerous moment as well, providing this platform and atmosphere to the North Korean regime and make this uncertainty and atmosphere and within South Korean politics and society all across. I mean, of course, South Korea is not alone, as you can imagine. And I am based in the United Kingdom, and we were carefully watching the situation in South Korea last night. And also we do know that there are over 28,000 US and NATO troops are currently stationed in South Korea defend North Korea's nuclear threat.
Okay.
So we as North Koreans and SKPs especially, we still think because that was democracy and democratic order of this country, and such things were possible within few hours. Martial law declared or lifted the martial law after 6 hours. And but I have to concern that what's going to come over the next few weeks, and how this might provide opportunity for the North Korean regime as well.
Yeah, I just want to ask you a little bit more about how North Koreans feel towards the South Koreans, and I'm talking here at the sort of the level of the normal person on the street. You've described in a British newspaper being taught to hate South Koreans when you were in North Korea. Just tell us how you learned that. So
South Korea is the enemy to all the education level in North Korea. And along, of course, they always regard South Koreans as the enemy along with the Western side. I mean, if you see two types of brainwashing educations in North Korea, which implementation starts from age 12 months. But the first brainwashing education in North Korea is you are brainwashing them to believe and think and actually the Kim family as your God and great leaders. That brainwashing education starts from age 12 months when they start work by bowing to Kim family picture frames in every household in North Korea. But the second brainwashing education is very interesting. It is about anti-religious education. Why? They brainwashing you that such as religion and particularly and Christianity, it is American religion, and they try to use that religion to destroy to North Korean communist society. So this anti, by all means, that world and spectrum of the whole atmosphere towards the US and whole Westerns. And then they call South Korea as a puppet of the Western imperialists, which I grew up in North Korea, and many of my friends and generations, we believed and in that one way or another. And I also believed the first Kim, Kim Il-sung. I thought he was God. And when he died, I genuinely cried overnight and not eating well, in which I was even asking for my father, who was a history teacher in high school.
And what do you think of him now, Timothy? What do you think of him now when you think back about Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and the rest of the Kim dynasty? What are your thoughts about them today?
Well, they're nothing more than just a man, and whose ambition and created the country as a large prison society and close people's eyes and block ears and brainwashing from very young age, and media the media blockade from both outside and inside. It is a tragic, the country, how it has created a huge prison, I could call a prison country in the world. And there are 25 million people locked in this cage, and they cannot see, they cannot watch, they cannot listen, but they have to forcibly act and speak and think as the Kim, which is very sad. It is one of the reasons I have become a human rights activist myself, to speak and raise awareness of the situation. And I'm sure the regime, what's been maintaining, holding such as the darkest we so-called the Hermit Kingdom, it won't go that far. Of course, it has been there over the past 70 years, but generations growing, and they desire and they want to see the truth. They can block it and completely, as the state has and the regime has failed to destroy the hope and future and all of this, what generations desire continue move forward in this way between inside and outside.
Timothy, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, just lastly, I don't know if you have any contact with anyone in North Korea at the moment. Just tell us what you know with regards to the situation there right now.
Well, we do hear from inside family members. It can be both directly and indirectly. However, as you know and the world knows, there are no such mobile phones, internet, social media, or Zoom call like you can invite me all the way from London available. But the situation is bad inside North Korea, and it's been around 17 years I escaped from this country, but the situation has been getting worse and worse. However, what it means, I'm complete closure of the borders and barely escape anyone from inside the country, what I did years ago. Maybe that could be the last stage of the process, and especially with the international uncertainty movement, what is come to expect. And yet, people from outside haven't stopped, continue stand and fight against the regime.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. Timothy Cho, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.